The lawyer's words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. I stood in the parlor where I had once scrubbed floors on my knees, where I had served tea with downcast eyes, where I had existed as property. And now, somehow, I owned it all. "Miss Sarah," the lawyer repeated, clearing his throat, "do you understand what I've just read to you?" I understood. I understood too well. Master Edmund Fairweather had left me everything: the plantation, the house, the land, the remaining livestock, and what little money survived the war. 300 acres of Virginia soil that had drunk the sweat and blood of my people. And now it was mine. My hands trembled in my lap. These hands that had picked cotton, cooked meals, and, God forgive me, had known his touch in the darkness when no one was watching. "Why?" I whispered. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "The will was executed legally, ma'am. Signed, witnessed, and sealed 2 weeks before his death. 2 weeks before the fever took him. 2 weeks before the war truly ended for us in this corner of Virginia. April 1865. The world was turning upside down, and I was caught in the middle of it. I was born on this land in 1840, 25 years of constant survival. My mother, Grace, worked in the big house before me. She taught me to read in secret, using the master's own books when the family slept. Knowledge is a key, child, as she would whisper. Someday you might need to unlock a door. I never imagined the door would be to this house, as its mistress. The other freed people gathered outside when I emerged, faces I'd known all my life: old Moses, who'd lost 3 fingers to frostbite in the winter of '63, Clara and her children, young Thomas, barely 16, whose back bore scars from the overseer's whip, and a dozen others who had nowhere else to go. "Is it true, Sarah?" Clara asked, her voice sharp with something between hope and accusation. "You own Fairweather Plantation now?" "I don't know what I own," I said honestly, "but I know what I owe. We'll figure this out together." That first night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the master bedroom. Instead, I lay on my old pallet in the room behind the kitchen, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had become this impossible thing. Edmund Fairweather was 28 when I turned 16. He had returned from university in Richmond, full of ideas about agricultural reform and the changing South. His father, Old Master Josiah, had died the winter before, leaving Edmund to manage the plantation alone. I remember the first time he really looked at me. Not through me the way white folks usually did, but at me. I was carrying linens through the hallway when I stumbled, dropping the entire basket. I expected anger. Instead, he knelt and helped me gather the scattered sheets. "You're Grace's daughter," he said. "Sarah, isn't it?" "Yes, master." I kept my eyes down. "I've seen you reading." His voice was quiet. "In the library at night." My blood went cold. "I'm sorry, master, I won't." "No." He placed a folded sheet in my hands. "I want you to keep reading. In fact, I'd like to discuss books with someone. Would you join me Thursday evenings? Officially, you'll be organizing the library, but really, we'll talk." That's how it began. Not with force or violence, but with books and conversation, with Wordsworth and Whitman, with debates about philosophy and human nature. He was lonely, I realize now. And God help me, I was hungry for knowledge, for recognition, for proof that my mind mattered. The other enslaved people noticed. "You spending time with Master Edmund," my mother said one morning, her voice careful. "Be cautious, Sarah. However kind he seems, he still owns you, don't forget that." I couldn't forget. Even when his hand brushed mine over a book's pages, even when he looked at me with something that might have been longing. Even when, in the winter of 1858, everything changed. The night was bitter cold. He'd been drinking, not drunk, but loosened somehow. We were alone in the library, discussing Frederick Douglass's narrative, which he'd obtained from a northern correspondent. "How can you read this and still—" I stopped myself. "Still own slaves?" He set down his glass. "I can't. Not in good conscience. But if I free everyone tomorrow, where do they go? How do they survive? The law, society, the economy, it's all built on this evil system. So you do nothing." Anger crept into my voice, dangerous anger. I do what I can. I don't use the whip. I allow families to stay together. You keep us in chains and call it kindness." The words erupted from me like water from a broken dam. I stood, ready to run, to face whatever punishment came. But instead he stood too and pulled me to him and kissed me. I should have pushed away. I should have remembered what I was, what he was. But in that moment I kissed him back, pouring all my anger and confusion and impossible longing into that forbidden touch. Afterward, we both knew nothing would ever be the same. Our relationship existed in shadows and stolen moments. He came to my quarters at night, or we met in the far fields where no one ventured. He spoke of loving me, of wishing things were different. He gave me gifts, books, a silver comb, once a dress of blue silk that I could never wear outside my small room. He also continued to own me. That contradiction lived in my chest like a burning coal. How could I feel tenderness for a man who held the papers that defined me as property? How could I respond to his touch while knowing that legally, technically, he could do whatever he wished and I would have no recourse? My mother understood before I spoke a word. "Oh, child," she said, touching my face, "this will break your heart in ways you can't imagine yet." She was right, because despite everything, despite the impossibility, despite the moral tangle, I developed feelings I couldn't name. Not quite love, because how could there be love without freedom? But something complicated and real nonetheless. In 1859, I became pregnant. Edmund's face went pale when I told him. "Are you certain?" "Yes." He paced the library floor. We'll say you're to help with household management. You'll do lighter work. I'll make sure you have what you need. And when the baby comes, when everyone sees a child with your eyes?" He had no answer for that. In the end, it didn't matter. I lost the baby in my 4th month. The midwife said these things happened, but I saw the relief in Edmund's face, and something inside me calcified. I pulled away after that, returned to being the dutiful house servant, nothing more. He tried to talk to me, to explain, to apologize, but I had seen too clearly what I was to him. Not a woman he truly loved, but a complication, a secret, a problem to be managed. Then came 1861 and everything crumbled. The war reached us slowly at first. News from Richmond. Young white men enlisting, talk of glory and Southern honor. Edmund didn't enlist immediately. The plantation needed managing, he said, but I think he was conflicted about the cause. "They're fighting to preserve slavery," he said one evening. We had started talking again, carefully, distantly. "How can I take up arms for that?" "Then don't. It's not that simple. This is my home. These are my people, I mean the other plantation owners, the community. If I don't fight, I'm a traitor. And if you do fight, you're a traitor to everything you claim to believe." I met his eyes. To me. He enlisted the next month. The war years were chaos. With Edmund gone, and most white men either dead or fighting, the plantation fell into disrepair. The overseer, a cruel man named Garrett, took control. The careful balance Edmund had maintained, the illusion of benevolence, evaporated. Garrett used the whip freely. He cut rations. He worked us harder, trying to extract profit from a dying system. Several people ran away, seeking union lines. Some were caught and brought back to face brutal punishment. I kept my head down and survived. I used what Edmund had taught me to help others, teaching them to read in secret, sharing information I gleaned from managing the house accounts, helping plan escapes for those brave enough to try. My mother died in the winter of 1863, pneumonia. I held her hand as she slipped away. "Be smart, baby girl," she whispered. "The world's changing. You got to be ready." Edmund came home twice on leave. The first time in 1862, he was still recognizable, thinner, harder, but himself. The second time in 1864, he was a ghost. Something in his eyes had died. "I've seen things," he said, sitting in the parlor while I served him coffee. "Done things. How do we come back from this? How does anyone?" I wanted to feel sympathy. Instead, I felt only numbness. "I don't know, Master." "Don't call me that." His voice cracked. "Please, Sarah, not you." But that's what he was, what he'd always been. The war hadn't changed that fundamental truth. Lee surrendered in April 1865. News traveled fast. carried by jubilant freed people and devastated Confederates. We were free. After 246 years of slavery in this country, we were free. I stood in the yard when I heard, feeling. Nothing, then everything. I fell to my knees and sobbed. Great. Wrenching sounds that came from somewhere ancient and primal. Clara grabbed my hands. We're free, Sarah, free. But free to do what? Free to go where? We had no money, no land, no education beyond what we'd stolen for ourselves. Freedom without resources was just a different kind of cage. Edmund returned home a week later. The war had aged him 20 years. He moved like an old man. Though he was only 33, he had a cough he couldn't shake. He called everyone together. You're all free now. That's law. I can't offer much. The plantation's bankrupt, the fields are fallow, and I don't have money for wages. But if you want to stay and work for shares of whatever we manage to produce, I'll do my best by you. Some left immediately, determined to find family, to start new lives, to never see this place again. I understood. But others like me had nowhere else to go. This was the only home we'd known. If you're watching this story unfold and feeling the weight of these impossible choices, drop a comment telling me where you're from and hit that subscribe button. Let's explore these hidden chapters of history together. Edmund called me to the library that night. Sarah, I need to speak with you. About what? He looked older in the lamplight, shadows under his eyes. About everything. About us. There is no us. I kept my voice level. There never really was. That's not true. I loved you. You owned me. The words came out flat, heavy. Love requires freedom, Edmund. You can't love someone you own. He flinched. I know, God, I know. I tried to... To what? To make it right? You can't. Some things are too broken to fix. We stood in silence. Finally, he said, I'm dying, Sarah. The doctors in Richmond confirmed it. Consumption. I have perhaps 6 months. I should have felt triumph or justice or grief. Instead, I felt only tired. I'm sorry. I've made arrangements. I've written a will. I wanted you to know. That's not my concern. It should be, because I'm leaving everything to you. The words made no sense. What? The plantation? The house? Everything? It's yours, Sarah. I can't undo what I did, what my family did, but I can give you this. I stared at him. That's insane. They'll never allow it. Your cousins in Richmond, the neighbors, it's legal, I've made certain. They'll contest it probably, but the will is solid. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. I know it doesn't make things right. I know it can't erase the past. But maybe you can build something better here, something new. I don't want your guilt money. It's not about guilt. It's about responsibility. About trying to... He stopped, coughing again. Just think about it, please. I left him there, my mind spinning with impossible possibilities and ancient rage. Edmund Fairweather died on April 28, 1865. I helped the doctor care for him in his final days, not because I loved him, but because I had been trained since childhood to serve, and some habits die harder than others. In his delirium, he called for his mother, for his father, for lost friends. Sometimes he called my name. Once he grabbed my hand with surprising strength. I'm sorry, he whispered, for all of it. You deserved better. You deserved everything. Yes, I said simply, I did. He died the next morning as sun came through the window, turning the room gold. I closed his eyes and felt complicated. Not grief exactly, but an acknowledgement of something ending. The lawyer came from Richmond 3 days later to read the will. That's when my new, impossible life began. The first month was chaos. Edmund's cousins from Richmond arrived, faces red with fury. How dare a freed slave inherit Fairweather Plantation? It was unnatural, illegal, immoral. The lawyer, a thin man named Peterson who'd fought for the Union, stood firm. The will is legal. Miss Sarah is the rightful heir. This is an outrage, Edmund's cousin William shouted. I'll see you in court. Please do, Peterson replied calmly. I look forward to explaining to a federal judge how you're trying to invalidate a legal will because the beneficiary is a Negro. In 1865, right after a war, we fought to end slavery. They left. threatening lawsuits that never materialized. The new world was too uncertain, too transformed for old prejudices to function legally, even if they still ruled hearts. But winning the legal battle was just the beginning. I had to figure out what to do with a broken-down plantation, a dozen freed people who depended on it, and my own tangled feelings about the whole situation. Old Moses became my unlikely advisor. He'd been on the plantation longer than anyone, brought from Africa as a child. His wisdom was born of survival. "You can't run this place like they did," he said, sitting with me on the porch one evening. "That time is dead, but you can't just walk away either. Too many folks depend on this land. So what do I do? You make something new, something we build together, not from the top down." I called a meeting. Everyone who'd stayed gathered in the yard, 15 adults, 8 children. I stood on the porch, feeling every eye on me. "I didn't ask for this one," I began. "I don't feel worthy of it. This land is soaked in suffering, and I can't forget that. But it's ours now, not mine. Ours. So here's what I propose. We form a cooperative. We work the land together, share the harvest equally. We build a school for the children. We create something that honors our people, not the system that enslaved us." Silence. Then young Thomas spoke up. "You really mean that? Equal shares?" "Equal shares, equal say. We vote on major decisions. I'll manage the business side, keeping records, dealing with merchants and banks. But we all have a voice." Clara stood. "Some folks won't like this. White folks in town, other plantation owners. They'll see you as getting above your station. Us as getting above ours." "Let them," I said. "We're free now. We get to define what that means." Not everyone agreed. 3 families left, uncomfortable with the arrangement or eager to try their luck elsewhere. But 12 people stayed, and we began the slow work of transformation. The first year was brutal. We planted cotton, it was what we knew, but the market was chaos. Confederate currency was worthless, and we had no credit with northern banks. We scraped by on vegetables from our garden and what little we could trade. I spent hours managing accounts, writing letters to potential buyers, negotiating with merchants who were shocked to find a Negro woman running a plantation. Many refused to deal with me. Some tried to cheat me, thinking I was ignorant. They learned otherwise quickly. "This contract says you'll pay 15 cents a pound," I told one merchant, pointing to the document. "Your verbal offer was 20, which is it?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I assumed you couldn't read." "You assumed wrong. 20 cents, or I sell elsewhere." We got 20 cents, but the hardest part wasn't business, it was memory. Every room in the big house held ghosts. The library where Edmund and I had talked, the bedroom where he'd died, the kitchen where my mother had worked herself to exhaustion. I moved through these spaces like a stranger, unable to feel comfortable in the role of mistress, unable to escape the role of servant that had been branded into my soul. Clara found me one night, sitting in the dark library. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Can't figure out who I am. Slave, free woman, plantation owner. It's all tangled up." She sat beside me. "Maybe you're all of it. Maybe that's what makes you the right person for this. Or the worst person. Sometimes I think I'm betraying everyone by living here, by trying to make this work." "You think running away would honor our people more? Letting this place fall to ruin?" Clara shook her head. "You're turning a symbol of slavery into something else. That's powerful. Sarah, don't diminish it." Her words helped, but doubt remained my constant companion. In 1866, we had our first real harvest. Not a fortune, but enough to pay everyone a small wage and buy supplies for the next season. We celebrated with a feast. Fish from the river, vegetables from our garden, bread fresh from the oven. Old Moses raised a cup. "To new beginnings. To freedom," Clara added. "To family," young Thomas said, looking around at all of us. I felt tears sting my eyes. Maybe this was possible. Maybe we could build something worthwhile from the ashes. But Virginia in Reconstruction was a powder keg. White resentment simmered. The Ku Klux Klan was forming, and night riders terrorized freed people throughout the South. We heard stories. Burnings, beatings, murders. "They'll come for us eventually," Moses warned. A Negro woman running a plantation? That's everything they hate. Then we'll be ready. We organized watches at night. Young Thomas, who'd learned to shoot during the war, trained others. We weren't looking for violence, but we wouldn't be helpless either. The first incident came in August. Someone burned our tobacco shed. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. We weren't welcome in the new order these people imagined. The second incident was more direct. 3 hooded men rode up one night, torches blazing. "Send out the uppity nigger woman!" one shouted. I stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Behind me I heard others taking positions at the windows. "This is private property. Leave. You don't own nothing. You're just a—" I fired into the air. The shot echoed like thunder. The next one won't be a warning. They left, but I knew they'd return. Violence was becoming the White South's answer to a world they couldn't control anymore. In 1867, I traveled to Richmond to testify before the Freedmen's Bureau about conditions in our county. The lawyer Peterson had arranged it, believing my story could help shape policy. Richmond was transformed, full of Northern soldiers, freed people seeking work, white Southerners trying to rebuild. I'd never been off the plantation before, except for brief trips to the local market. The city was overwhelming. At the bureau, I told my story to a panel of 3 white men and 1 Negro man. I spoke about the plantation, the cooperative we'd formed, the resistance we faced, and your relationship with Edmund Fairweather, one man asked. There are rumors. I met his eyes. We had a complicated relationship, but it began when I was property and he was my owner. Whatever developed between us existed within that context. I won't pretend otherwise. Yet he left you his estate. He tried to make amends. Whether he succeeded is not for me to say. The Negro man, a minister named Reverend Johnson, spoke. What you're doing at Fairweather Plantation, it's extraordinary, a model of what freedom could mean. But you must be careful. There are many who will try to destroy what you're building. I know, but what choice do I have? Run, hide. We're making our stand. After the hearing, Reverend Johnson took me aside. You remind me of Harriet Tubman, same steel in your spine, but even she knew when to retreat to fight another day. Don't die for land, Sister Sarah. We need people like you alive. His words haunted my journey home. The violence escalated. In early 1868, night riders attacked again, this time with more men. We fought back, firing from the house. Young Thomas shot one attacker, wounding him. They retreated, but we knew the cost of that resistance. 3 days later, a group of white men from town arrived, not hooded riders, but respectable citizens. The sheriff was with them. There's been a complaint, the sheriff said, about a shooting. We defended our property, I replied. The man who was shot says it was unprovoked. He was part of a group attacking us. We have witnesses. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Be that as it may, folks are worried. There's talk of unrest. It might be better if you sold the plantation and moved on. Better for whom? For everyone. For your safety. It was a threat wrapped in concern. Leave or face consequences. That night, we held a meeting. I laid out the situation honestly. We can try to hold on, but the violence will likely get worse. Or we can sell and use the money to start fresh elsewhere, maybe in the north or out west. The debate was fierce. Some wanted to fight, to refuse to be driven from land we'd worked all our lives. Others feared for their children's safety. Clara spoke quietly. My grandmother was born in Africa, stolen from her home, brought here in chains. My mother was born here enslaved. I was born here enslaved. My daughter was born here free. This land holds all that history, the pain and the triumph. But I won't die for it. I won't let my children die for it. In the end, we voted to sell. Not out of cowardice, but out of pragmatism. We'd built something meaningful, but we couldn't defend it against the whole white power structure of the South. I sold Fairweather Plantation in June 1868 for $8 own dollars, far less than its value, but the best I could negotiate. I divided the money equally among everyone who'd stayed and worked the cooperative. That's your share too, I told them, about $650 each, enough to start over. Some families headed to Richmond or Washington. Others went to Philadelphia, where they had relatives. Clara's family went to Ohio, where her cousin had found work in a factory. I stood alone on the porch one last time before leaving. 3 years of freedom, 3 years of trying to transform this place. We'd failed, in a sense, but we'd also succeeded. We'd proven that freed people could manage land, conduct business, work cooperatively. We'd proven our humanity. Edmund's ghost felt very present in that moment. "Was this what you wanted?" I whispered to the empty air. "Did we honor your gesture or betray it?" No answer came, of course, just whined through the magnolia trees. I locked the door and walked away. I moved to Philadelphia with my share of the money. I bought a small house in a Negro neighborhood and opened a school for freed people. Adults learning to read and write, children getting the education slavery had denied. I used everything Edmund had taught me about literature and philosophy, everything I'd learned from managing the plantation, about accounting and contracts. I taught practical skills and abstract ideas, believing both were essential to true freedom. I never married. How could I, after everything? My relationship with Edmund had poisoned that possibility. I'd loved a man who owned me, hated him for owning me, grieved him when he died, and inherited his world. That tangle couldn't be easily resolved or replaced. Students sometimes asked about my past. I told them some of it: the plantation, the inheritance, the cooperative. I left out the intimate details, the complexity of Edmund and me. That was private, a wound that never fully healed. Over the years, I heard news from Virginia. Fairweather Plantation changed hands 3 times, each owner driving it deeper into debt. Eventually, it was abandoned, the buildings falling to ruin. The land was reclaimed by forest, erasing all evidence of what had been. Maybe that was fitting. Maybe some places should be forgotten. In my school, I taught a different kind of inheritance: knowledge, dignity, and the skills to build lives in freedom. Hundreds of students passed through over the decades. Some became teachers themselves, spreading the gift forward. I thought often about those 3 years at Fairweather Plantation, about Clara and Moses and young Thomas, about the impossible dream of transforming a symbol of oppression into something better. We'd failed to hold the land, but we'd succeeded in proving our worth, our capability, our humanity. And Edmund. I reached a kind of peace with his memory. He'd been a flawed man in a broken system, trying inadequately to make amends for sins that couldn't be forgiven. His gift was both generous and insufficient, meaningful and hollow. But it had been a beginning, and sometimes that's all we get. I kept one thing from the plantation, a book of poetry by Whitman that Edmund had given me during one of our library conversations. I read from it sometimes, especially the line, "I am large, I contain multitudes." Yes, I contained multitudes, slave and owner, victim and survivor, student and teacher, property and person. All of it was true, all of it was me. In 1903, a young Negro scholar visited me. He was researching life during Reconstruction, collecting oral histories. "Tell me about Fairweather Plantation," he said, notebook ready. I told him the facts, the inheritance, the cooperative, the violence, the sale. I didn't tell him about the nights with Edmund, about the baby I'd lost, about the complicated love that had existed in the shadow of slavery. "You were remarkable," he said when I finished. "You took a symbol of bondage and tried to transform it." "We tried," I corrected. "It was never just me. It was Clara and Moses and all of us together." "Still, your name should be remembered." But I knew it wouldn't be. History remembers the famous, the dramatic, the clear narratives, not complicated women who lived in the gray spaces, who loved and hated the same man, who inherited oppression and tried to redeem it. That was fine. I'd lived my truth. That was enough. The echoes of Fairweather Plantation faded, but the questions it raised never did. What does freedom mean without resources? How do we reckon with complicated pasts? Can love exist across the divide of ownership? Is transformation possible, or are some systems too corrupted to redeem? I died in Philadelphia on March 15, 1912, at the age of 72. By then, I'd taught nearly 2,000 students, seen the world change in ways I'd never imagined, and made my peace with the contradictions of my life. My students carried flowers at my funeral. They sang hymns my mother had taught me in secret during slavery. They spoke of the knowledge I'd shared, the doors I'd helped open. No one mentioned Edmund Fairweather. That chapter of my life was private, known only to me. I was buried in Eden Cemetery, among other freed people and their descendants. My stone read simply, Sarah Fairweather, 1840-1912, teacher. She opened doors. Historical record. Sarah Fairweather lived in Philadelphia from 1868 until her death in 1912. She operated a school for freed people that educated over 2,000 students across 4 decades. While local newspapers occasionally mentioned her work in education, the details of her inheritance and relationship with Edmund Fairweather were never publicly documented. After her death, the school was continued by former students for another 20 years before closing during the Great Depression. She never married and left no direct descendants. Her papers, if any existed, have been lost to history. The Fairweather Plantation in Virginia was abandoned by 1890 and reclaimed by the forest. Today, only scattered foundation stones mark where it stood. The echoes of Sarah's impossible inheritance still resonate, a reminder that freedom's meaning extends far beyond broken chains into the complex territory of dignity, choice, and self-determination. If her journey moved you, join us as we uncover more hidden stories from the shadows of American history. Subscribe to our channel and drop a comment sharing what resonated with you most about Sarah's story. Your engagement keeps these powerful narratives alive.